Punta Cana. I mean, the name itself just conjures up these images, of like endless beaches and, just a perfect escape. But what happens when that paradise, when that image becomes the backdrop for like a really unsettling disappearance?
Yeah.
Today we're diving into the story of Sudiksha Konanki, a 20-year-old who vanished during what should have been, a dream vacation. So let's try to piece together, what we know, what's out there, and listen to the voices from her last known night.
You know what really gets me about these kinds of cases is like you have the image of a vacation spot, right?
Yeah.
A place where people are supposed to be relaxing and having fun, and then you have this really stark contrast of a disappearance.
Right.
It makes you want to look deeper, right? Like beyond the surface and look for answers, like in the shadows.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's peel back the layers of this mystery. Who was Sudiksha Konanki before her name became, like synonymous with this case?
Well, Sudiksha was a 20-year-old from Ashburn, Virginia. She was a third-year medical student at the University of Pittsburgh. I mean, that already tells us a lot, right? Someone driven, a bright future ahead.
Yeah. And from what we know of her friends and family, she wasn't someone who shied away from life.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite, actually.
No, not at all. She's been described as someone trustworthy, energetic, really outgoing, and she had this passion for travel, So this trip to the Dominican Republic, it wasn't like her first time exploring new places, so she was comfortable,
Right.
Confident in unfamiliar surroundings.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So this particular trip, it was a planned getaway with 5 friends. They were heading to the beaches of Punta Cana, looking for a break, right? From everything. They arrived at the Rio Republica Hotel on March 3rd, 2025. The first few days were, just normal vacation stuff.
Yeah.
Pool, beach, maybe some partying. But then the night of March 6th, it takes this uncertain turn.
Yeah, and the timeline is really important here. So around 4:15 a.m., Sudiksha is seen on security footage for the last time. She's walking towards the beach with her friends, and there were 2 men with them. It's important to note she wasn't alone at this point.
Right, right. And that's where things split. Her friends, they decided to head back to the hotel. But Sudiksha, she stayed behind with one of the men, an American tourist named Joshua Reeby. That image from the security camera, that's the last time anyone sees her.
Her decision to stay on the beach with Reeby at that hour, it's a puzzle in itself,
Yeah.
I mean, what led her to make that choice? What kind of interaction did they have before? Those are the questions that really come to mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the next morning, the reality sets in.
Right.
She doesn't return to her room. Her friends, they're frantic, and they raise the alarm. And that's when the search begins.
Right.
Local police and hotel security, they start reviewing footage, interviewing potential witnesses. And Joshua Reeb's name, it becomes front and center in all of this.
Yeah, because he was the last known person to be with her. Reeb, he becomes a key witness. He's interviewed by the authorities on Wednesday, March 12th. And his testimony is crucial, even though there are some things that don't quite add up.
Yeah, and his account is full of details that, like, the more you dig into them, the more questions you have.
Exactly.
So he says he and Sudiksha went into the water and a wave knocked them over. He claims that he saved her, saw her leave the water, but then lost sight of her in the darkness of the night.
Yeah, he describes, grabbing her, taking her back to the shore, watching her walk away in the shallow water to get her stuff. Then, he says, he started throwing up all this seawater that he had swallowed and decided to lie down on a beach chair to rest, just assuming that she had left already.
But this is where the narrative gets even more intriguing. Like, the authorities, the ones who interviewed him, they picked up on inconsistencies in his answers, things that just didn't fit neatly into the whole picture.
Right. Right. And those inconsistencies in his testimony, they're what cast doubt, and they open the door to different interpretations of what actually happened. Like, why did some details seem to change? Was he leaving things out? Was he remembering things differently? These are the questions that just naturally arise, right?
Yeah, for sure. And from those shadows of doubt, different hypotheses emerge about what could have happened to Sudiksha.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, the one the Dominican authorities initially went with, it points to a tragic accident, a possible drowning.
Yeah, and this theory, it's based on the information that there was a red flag on the beach, warning about dangerous conditions for swimming. So if, like Ribe says, a wave swept them away and Sudiksha struggled in the water, well, accidental drowning, it becomes a possibility.
Yeah.
But it's not the only logical explanation.
Right. Right. And then you have the perspective of her family, who from the very beginning they've expressed serious reservations about this official version.
Hmm.
They're suggesting that she might have been a victim of a violent crime.
Yeah, the family's reluctance to accept the accident theory, it's understandable, especially if they sense there are these cracks in the key witness's story. The idea of a violent crime, it introduces this much darker element and it raises concerns about safety in the area. So what is it about Reeves' account or the lack of other evidence that could be fueling this suspicion, for them?
Yeah. And then there's also, the possibility that Sudiksha was a victim of human trafficking,
Mm.
something that's sadly a reality in certain tourist destinations. It's been mentioned, but, with less concrete evidence at this point.
Right, yeah. Speculation about trafficking, it often comes up in missing person cases, especially when there are few clear witnesses and the missing person is young and vulnerable. But it's important to note that based on the information we have, there's no strong evidence to support this theory in Sudiksha's case. So what kind of signs or circumstances, would raise those trafficking suspicions that just don't seem to be present here?
Right, right. Now, this case, unsurprisingly, it's grabbed the attention of media outlets internationally.
Yeah. The disappearance of a young American student in such a popular tourist spot, I mean, of course it's going to generate, widespread media coverage. And that, in turn, fuels this debate about the safety of tourists visiting the Dominican Republic, which is a valid concern, right, for anyone planning trips.
Absolutely. And Sudiksha's family, they've actively used social media. It's become a powerful tool for them to keep the search alive and put pressure on authorities to keep investigating. It really reflects the family's anguish and determination to find answers.
Yeah. Social media, it's become a crucial strategy for families in these situations, to raise public awareness, keep attention on the case. And in this case, I mean, the family's insistence, it really underlines their belief that there's more to this story than what's officially been revealed.
Okay, so to try and get a clearer picture, to get into the nitty-gritty, we have access to the full interrogation transcript of Joshua Stephen Reeb. Let's dive into those exchanges because I think there were details in there that just muddy the waters even more.
Right. This is where things get really interesting, like we're going beyond the summaries and we're getting to hear the questions asked and the responses given or not given in almost real time, by the key witness.
So let's start by getting to know Joshua Stephen Reeb a little bit better. He's a serving student from Iowa, arrived at the Rio Republica on March 1st, 2025, a few days before Sudiksha. He says he met her in the pink lobby of the hotel after a party while he was having a few drinks with a friend.
Right. And the description of their initial meeting, it seems kind of, coincidental, like a casual tourist encounter. Small talk, sharing drinks, and then comes the spontaneous idea to head to the beach. It's important to note that initially it was a larger group, Sudiksha, her friends, Ribe, and his friend.
Right, right. But at the beach, the dynamic shifts a little. Ribe describes, going into the water, leaving his stuff on the sand, and then approaching the group of girls.
Yeah.
And when asked why he went to them specifically, his response is, I don't know, someone suggested it.
Right.
Which is a surprisingly vague answer, especially in a police interview, don't you think?
Yeah. An answer like that, it could mean different things, right? It could be a genuine lack of memory, a minor detail lost in a night of partying. Or it could be a way to avoid revealing a more specific personal reason for approaching that group, right? I mean, either way, his vagueness, it doesn't really shed much light on his initial intentions.
Yeah. Then there's the account of swimming in the sea. Reba mentions they were in shallow water, just chatting, and that he and Sudiksha kissed a little. He states that he had never seen her before that night.
Mm-hmm.
And when asked about how that intimate moment came about, his response is, on our way to the beach, she was giving me little kisses on my face. Which, it seems like a minor detail, but it paints this picture of an interaction that's maybe more intense, right, than just casual.
Absolutely. I mean, these small details can often be really telling, Her taking the initiative, according to him, to give those kisses, it could indicate a certain openness, a mutual connection, even if they had just met that night. So, how might this detail affect the interpretation of what happens next?
Right. Then comes the critical moment. The big wave. He describes being hit hard, being pulled into deeper water. He talks about his efforts to help Sudiksha, even mentioning his background as a lifeguard, albeit in pools, acknowledging that the ocean was a different beast altogether. He says he held her under his arm and swam to bring her back to shore, swallowing a lot of water in the process, feeling like he was going to pass out, several times.
His description of that struggle, it's harrowing, it's believable, but it's what happens immediately after they both get back to shore that raises the biggest questions.
Right.
Once they're back on land, he says she headed to retrieve her stuff, which was in knee-deep water. He claims he asked her if she was okay, but got no response because he started throwing up all the water he had swallowed. So how reliable can his memory be, right? Of those moments, those confusing, stressful moments.
Right. And after he throws up, Rib looks up and she's gone.
Right.
He just assumes she got her things and left. Feeling sick, exhausted, he decides to lie down on a beach chair, falls asleep, wakes up hours later because of the sun and mosquito bites. Then he goes to his friend's room to look for his phone, and finally he goes back to his own room to sleep some more.
Yeah, there are several things here that really stand out. I mean, first, the speed with which he assumes she's gone, especially after such a potentially traumatic experience in the water. Then his decision to sleep outside, on a beach chair feeling sick instead of going back to the comfort of his room. And then his apparent lack of immediate active concern about her not being around. So what could explain these decisions and assumptions?
Right, exactly. Like when asked directly if he wasn't curious to see the girl he had just shared, an intimate moment with on the beach, his response is that he expected to run into her the next day, that he thought he would see her somewhere in the resort. And he reiterates that after watching her walk away in the water, he never saw her again. Like, isn't that lack of immediate follow-up a little strange?
His lack of, immediate action to confirm her well-being after it's puzzling, to say the least. I mean, given what they just went through, you would expect more concern, right? At least an attempt to make sure she was safe before just heading off to sleep. Could he have underestimated the gravity of the situation? Could he have mistakenly assumed she was fine?
Right, right. Then there's the matter of the information he had about her disappearance.
Yeah.
He mentions that her friends, they sent a text to his friend because his friend had one of their numbers. However, Reba claims he didn't know what the text said.
Right. This adds another layer of mystery, I mean, even if he wasn't the direct recipient of the text, the fact that his friends were in communication with her group suggests that, word of her being missing was already spreading within their circle. So his claim of not knowing the content, I mean, it could be true, but it's also, convenient in a way. Like, what would it mean if he did know the content of that message?
Right, right. And then we get to the most sensitive questions, the ones where he consistently invokes his lawyer's advice and refuses to provide answers.
Yeah. This pattern of selective silence throughout the interrogation, it's really telling. I mean, when faced with direct questions about the truthfulness of his story, about what he might have told his friend about her, about his own opinion about her disappearance, about whether he knew if she could swim, about whether she made any signals or cried for help in the sea, even about whether he informed hotel authorities or police about the incident, his response is always, my lawyers have advised me not to answer.
It's a silence that speaks volumes, don't you think? Like, while he has every legal right not to answer and to follow his legal team's advice, these refusals, they inevitably cast doubt on the completeness and the integrity of his account. So what information could he be trying to protect by not answering these specific questions?
Right. The constant invocation of legal counsel when faced with these key questions suggests that there are aspects of the situation that he'd rather not discuss, or where he fears his answers could have negative repercussions for his position. So what scenarios could explain this reluctance to fully cooperate with the investigation?
Yeah. He also mentions a peculiar detail that the next day, his friends found his belongings on the beach because he never picked them up after the incident in the sea. However, he claims that his shoes and his room key card were stolen.
Right. This just adds another piece to the puzzle, If he fell asleep on the beach after the incident, it's plausible that he wouldn't have collected his things. But this alleged theft of his shoes and his key card, it raises additional questions, right? I mean, who would have been near his belongings while he was sleeping? And why take those specific items? Could this theft be connected somehow to her disappearance?
Yeah, and finally, Reby recalls what he was drinking that night. Vodka and 7-Up, several shots of tequila, including some pink tequilas that the girls offered them. The mention of alcohol consumption, it's relevant because it could have affected his memory or his judgment during the events that night.
Right. Alcohol intake, it's a factor that's always considered in these kinds of investigations, because it can significantly impact the perception of events and the ability to recall details accurately. So how might alcohol have affected his memory or his interpretation of what happened, leading up to her disappearance?
And to wrap up this analysis of the interrogation, it's mentioned that both the FBI and the Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, are closely cooperating with the Dominican authorities in the investigation, the search for Sudiksha. This really underlines the seriousness with which this case is being handled, at the international level.
The involvement of U.S. federal agencies, it signifies that there's a deep interest and a concern about her disappearance, given her nationality and the mysterious circumstances, right? So what kind of resources and expertise are these agencies bringing to the investigation?
And so we come to the end of this deep dive, but sadly, the mystery surrounding Sudiksha Konanki's disappearance, it still remains. Her family continues tirelessly searching for answers, and the authorities are continuing with the investigation.
I think what's most unsettling, as we highlighted at the beginning, is that there are still so many unanswered questions surrounding this case. The inconsistencies in the key witness's account, his repeated refusals to answer those crucial questions, the absence of other direct witnesses, all of it contributes to this atmosphere of deep mystery, and uncertainty.
So for you listening, I want you to just take a moment to think about the timeline of events, the details that he reveals, and those he chooses to keep hidden, behind that lawyer-advised silence. What details stand out to you? What raises your suspicions? What could have happened in those final moments on the beach, when she walked away into the darkness? The answers, for now, they remain elusive, lost in the haze of a night in Punta Cana. But the search for the truth, it continues.